Hello, everyone. We are about to start our December MTGA educational webinar. We've got some attendees trickling in, so we'll give it just a minute or two to let more of them join. All right, I think we are good to get started. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded. We will be posting it onto the MTGA members only section of the website for review later. Today, we are starting out with the Department of Employment and Economic Development. We have Corinne and Greg online to present the new Minnesota Paid Leave Program. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will address them as they come up. And there'll be time at the end of the presentation for questions as well. So, Corinne, feel free to take it away.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Corinne Horowitz. I'm the Public Engagement Strategist in the new Paid Leave Program within the Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED. First, I want to thank Peter and the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association and all of you for joining us today to talk about this new state program. Our presentation today has three parts. First, I'll give a brief history and overview of the Paid Leave Program. Then I'll talk through employer roles and responsibilities. Finally, our Paid Leave Director, Greg Norfleet, is on the line today, and we can answer any questions you have following the presentation. If you have questions that come up, please put them in the chat. If you can't stay until the end, we have a forum on our website, paidleave.mn.gov, to submit questions. I will also share these slides following the event today. We've been talking to employers across the state in the past few months, and we know that small business owners care about their employees and want to support them when they have big moments in their life, whether they're happy moments like the birth of a new child or more challenging ones, like dealing with a serious medical diagnosis or condition. But as you all know, this can be very financially challenging to do. Up until now, small businesses have had to shoulder the burden and the cost of paid leave for themselves or for their employees, which puts them at a competitive disadvantage with larger companies that can provide those robust benefits. Paid leave is a new social insurance program that will level the playing field for small business owners and support you and your employees when you need it the most. So I'll start with a bit of history about the program. The Minnesota Paid Leave Law was enacted in May 2023 and updated in the last legislative session. It makes paid family and medical leave coverage available to all Minnesota workers beginning on January 1st, 2026. So unlike Earned Sick and Safe Time, this benefit is paid for and administered by the state, not by employers. The law provides both job protections and partial wage replacements paid for by the state to individuals who take leave for a qualifying condition, like to bond with a new child or for medical care for themselves and their loved ones. The paid leave program is going to be funded by premiums made up of contributions by employers and employees. There's also a reduced premium for small businesses, so it'll be cheaper for them to participate in the program. The program is split into two major buckets, family leave and medical leave. Medical leave is exactly what it sounds like. It's time to care for an individual's own serious medical condition. These are conditions that last at least 7 days. To be approved for a leave, an employee must have certification from a healthcare provider that the leave is medically necessary. Family leave is a bit broader and includes welcoming a new child into your home, whether through birth, foster care, or adoption, caring for a loved one with their own serious healthcare condition, providing support for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, and for our military during active deployments, whether domestically or abroad. The program offers up to 12 weeks of medical leave or 12 weeks of family leave in a single benefit year. But an individual is limited to taking 20 weeks of combined leave within a benefit year, meaning you could take 12 weeks of medical and 8 weeks of family leave, but you could not take 12 weeks of each type. As for who the paid leave program covers, the program is very broad. It covers nearly every Minnesota employer, regardless of business size, amount of revenue, number of employees, and nearly all categories of workers. It includes full-time, part-time, temporary, hourly, and salary employees. It does also include interns. Almost every employer and employee is covered under the paid leave law. The only exceptions are independent contractors and self-employed individuals who are not required to participate in the program by default, but will be given the opportunity to opt in closer to implementation date. There's also a very narrow exclusion for certain seasonal hospitality employees. So I mentioned the program has both partial wage replacements and job protections. Partial wage replacements are going to be paid on a progressive scale when an individual is out on a qualified leave. What that means is that those who make the least income have the highest percentage of their wages replaced while they're out. As you can see on the slide, claimants will be able to receive between 55 to 90% of their income. Individuals will be eligible to qualify for this partial wage replacement if they earn at least 5.3% of the statewide average annual wage in the past 4 quarters. In 2023, that value was $3,684. So it's a fairly low barrier to entry. Job protections work a little differently. If an employee takes leave under the program, they'll need to be restored to the same position or an equivalent position with the same pay, benefits, length of service, and seniority as they had prior to taking that leave. Job protections kick in 90 days following the date of employment, which is different than wage replacements. So for partial wage replacements, there's an earnings threshold, and for job protections, there's a 10-year requirement. And that is a very quick overview of what the program is. Employers are a really key part of the successful paid leave program. Most people learn about benefits like paid leave through their employer. So we want to prepare employers to be informed and effective messengers for the program in order for employees to take advantage of it. We think of the employer's role in 4 different buckets. The first is educating and informing their employees about the program. The second is reporting wages and submitting premiums to fund the program. The third is supporting leave administration and coordination of benefits while someone's out on leave. And finally, working with us to collaborate and improve the program over time. It's important for employees to know about the program at least 30 days before they start paying into it or can begin taking leave. Employers must begin notifying their employees about the availability of paid leave in 2025 on or before December 1st, 2025. There are 2 major notification requirements for employers. The first is hanging a workforce poster in a conspicuous place in English or any language spoken by 5 or more employees. This is a pretty similar requirement to other wage and hour requirements like workman's comp or earn sick and save time. Prior to December 1st, 2025, Deed will create this poster for employers to use and translate in a variety of languages. And we'll make that available for download on the paid leave website. The second major notification requirement for December 1st, 2025 is for employers to notify each employee individually about the availability of benefits in their native language. To support employers in this, the state will create a model notification letter in multiple languages, and we'll also put that on our website to download closer to implementation dates. In some of our early engagement, we heard from employers they wanted the process to be as streamlined as possible. So paid leave partnered with the Unemployment Insurance Division, and all employers with a UI account have had their existing accounts automatically updated, and there's no further action needed. On October 31st of this year, the state began collecting wage detail information from employers. These reports contain the names, wages, and Social Security numbers paid to each employee on the payroll, and will be used to determine the employee's eligibility and benefits, as well as the premium payments once the program launches. The reports must be filed quarterly by employers using the unemployment insurance online system. The next one due is January 31st, 2025. For employers that don't currently participate in the unemployment insurance program and are required to participate in the paid leave program, we set up the ability to create paid leave only accounts. There are also a bucket of employers that have some employees that participate in UI and some who do not. For those employers, they will need to set up a paid leave only account just for employees who do not participate in the unemployment insurance program. So starting in January 2026, the paid leave program will be funded much like healthcare premiums are now, split between employers and employees. Premium rate is split into a family premium and a medical program. That is split again into an employer portion and an employee portion. Starting January 1st, 2026, employers can deduct up to 50% of premiums from employee paychecks. There is also a reduced premium for employers with fewer than 30 employees, with an average employee wage of less than 150% of the statewide average annual wage. Next is coordinating benefits and leave while someone is out on a qualifying leave. We recognize that paid leave really cannot exist on its own. Employers are already balancing a number of benefits like FMLA, short-term disability, and earned sick and safe time. And paid leave needs to fit into that larger picture. We'll be providing a lot of guidance on how these benefits coordinate with one another closer to implementation. We really want to create processes and systems that allow employers to coordinate any payments to an employee, as well as have transparency for when an employee is out on qualifying leave and when they're returning to work. Small business assistance is funding that's earmarked for small businesses. On January 1st, 2026, we'll launch a small business assistance grant program to help employers offset the cost of hiring temporary workers or paying existing workers to cover for an employee who's out on leave. Eligible employers can receive up to $3,000 per absence and $6,000 total in 1 year. We're committed to building paid leave with Minnesotans across the state. Input from businesses, organizations, and individuals helps to make paid leave work better for all Minnesotans. Over this past year, Minnesota Paid Leave held over 100 engagement sessions with a variety of stakeholders to answer questions and gather input on the program. This past fall, we hosted 17 in-person events across the state in partnership with the Minnesota Chamber Association with over 1,200 employees. We learned a lot, and we heard from many small farmers and got some really good questions and feedback, which are helping us design and troubleshoot the program in implementation. So we're learning a lot from employers, and it's making a big difference. There's a few key milestones to be aware of. Right now, you can register an account on the Minnesota Unemployment Insurance Division website at uimn.org. There are detailed step-by-step instructions of how to set up an account, and customer service representatives are available to reach out to if you have any questions. DEED published its final proposed rules for paid leave on November 25th. A copy of the rules and more information about how to comment on them can be found on the Office of Administrative Hearings website, which is linked on the paid leave website, paidleave.mn.us.gov. The comment period will close January 3rd, 2025. Every comment, whether critical, neutral, or supportive, is valuable feedback, and we encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Employers can choose to meet their responsibilities under the Minnesota Paid Leave Program by providing employees an equivalent plan that meets or exceeds the coverage offered by the state. We've been working closely with the Department of Commerce to develop a straightforward process to evaluate private plan or equivalent plan applications. The guidance for private or equivalent plans can be found on our paid leave website, paidleave.mn.gov. Early next year, we'll open the equivalent plan applications. These plans will be certified by the Department of Commerce, and additional information will be coming in the next few months. Finally, there are a lot of ways to stay in touch with us. We are very dedicated to making sure employers have the most up-to-date information possible. One way to keep in touch with us is our website, which I've mentioned, paidleave.mn.gov. We have a number of FAQs that are populated based off the questions we receive in these engagement sessions. We also have an employer toolkit and a monthly newsletter. The monthly newsletter provides information on implementation, answers to questions we're hearing, and new information when it becomes available. So now Director Norfleet is going to do a brief Q&A. And if we don't get to your question today, or if you feel more comfortable in a one-on-one setting, we do have the forum on our website where you can submit questions directly and we'll answer over email. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to continue to engage with us, and we're excited to continue partnering with you all as implementation moves forward and getting feedback to help make sure that the tools we develop provide value and create assets for employers. Thank you. And now we'll move on to Greg for Q&A.
Thanks, Corinne. And hi, everybody. My name is Greg Norfleet. I'm the director for the paid leave program here in Minnesota. And we're happy to take whatever questions you may have about the program. But as we're looking through the Q&A and the chat feature, there is a Q&A feature within the Zoom window. If you see the little button at the bottom that says Q&A, you can answer questions there. We'll definitely, that'll help us see what's on your mind. Even if you use the webinar chat just to send whatever questions you'd like us to address, we're happy to do that. As we're waiting, I can go through a couple of things that we've heard from other engagement sessions across the state. And I think one of the first ones that we normally hear is how does this work with other programs like FMLA or short-term disability or all of those other sorts of leaves and benefits that you're, as an employer, you may already offer? The answer to that, it actually has a few answers. So let's start off with FMLA. An employer is able to run the two programs concurrently if a leave qualifies under both of them. So if you are an employer that already participates in FMLA and your employee goes out on an FMLA qualifying leave, that time could count towards the allotment available under the paid leave program as well. Some of the more common ones we hear are around vacation time, paid time off, sick time. If you want to pay your employee or your employee is receiving cash benefits during the course of an absence, those can work in a couple of ways. The first is that as an employer, you would be able to designate those payments as a supplemental benefit payment. What that does is it makes it so that you can receive those funds to make up the difference between partial and full wage replacement. If you do not want to offer supplemental benefits, you are able to where your employee is still able to use their paid or accrued time off during the course of an absence, but that will be in lieu of receiving a benefit from the program. The other one that often comes up is around short-term disability programs. If you already have a short-term disability provider within your business offering that coverage. By statute, we are the first payer in those relationships, which means that we will not offset our benefit. However, an employee is limited to receiving their average weekly wage while they're out on a leave. So your private provider would be able to offset their own benefit. What that means tactically is that you should look, if you are offering short-term disability to your employees, you should look at your coverage and, if possible, adjust to an excess plan if you're going to be coordinating benefits between these two programs. Corinne, you've got a couple of questions. Do you want to run through one or two?
Greg, I don't see those questions.
Okay. Well, here's another one that we often hear is around if I'm a multi-state employer. So I have some employees that work in Iowa, some employees that work in Minnesota, and some of the work performed in multiple jurisdictions. What do I do for my employees? So eligibility for the paid leave program is determined based off of an individual employee's covered employment. The way that covered employment works is where the work is physically happening determines whether or not the person is covered under paid leave. We call this the locality test or the localization test. And the way that this works is first, is 50% or more of your work contained inside of the state of Minnesota? If so, then those employees are covered under the paid leave program. If they're spending more than 50% of their time in any other state, then those employees are not covered under the paid leave program. Now, there's one other situation where you may have an employee that works in more than 2 states, and so they don't spend 50% or more of their time in any particular state. In those cases, if the employee lives in Minnesota, they would be covered under the program. So that often leads to a question around remote work. In cases where there are remote workers, that may not be applicable to this particular audience, but in cases where there are remote workers, again, it depends on where the work is physically happening. So if you're a remote worker working from Minnesota more than 50% of the time, you would be covered. If you're a remote worker working in a different state like Iowa or North Dakota, South Dakota, you would not be covered if 50% of your work is performed in one of those other states.
Greg, we have had this question in another webinar where people who own a business and its owners are exempt from participating in UI. Do they have to participate in paid leave?
Yeah, great question. So one thing to know is that these programs are separate. Although we're using the Unemployment Insurance Division's UI Online platform to collect wage detail reports and premiums, our eligibility criteria is slightly different than what's required under the unemployment insurance system. Our eligibility criteria is broader than what's required under unemployment insurance. So for organizations that aren't covered by UI, they're very likely covered under paid leave. One of the first slides that Corinne went through today talked about how expansive our covered population is. Nearly every employer and every employee that's performing services within the state of Minnesota are covered by this program. If you find yourself in that situation, that your organization isn't required to participate in UI, or if you have certain employees that are not required to participate in UI, you'll need to report their wages using a paid leave only account. We can offer support in helping you get set up with that paid leave only account through the unemployment insurance website, which Corinne mentioned earlier. They also have contact center agents that are available to help you register and troubleshoot any issues that you may run into. I see we got one in the chat. Corinne, do you want to read that?
Okay, assuming a person is eligible for any and all program offerings, how long could they be out without return to work?
Okay, so this is a great question. As Corinne mentioned on the program overview slide, the program is really 2 lines of coverage: family leave and medical leave. With medical leave being about leave to take care of yourself, and family leave being time to take care of others. The program allows for up to 12 weeks of leave, of medical leave, or 12 weeks of family leave within a benefit year. A benefit year is a consecutive 52 weeks from the date of first absence. So you could take 12 weeks for a qualifying medical event or 12 weeks for a qualifying family event. Now, an employee may choose or may experience multiple qualifying conditions during the course of a year, and they may need both medical and family leave during that time. If that's the case, they'd be eligible for up to a total of 20 weeks of leave through the benefit year. The most common situation where this happens is related to welcoming a new child to your home through birth. In that case, the birth-giving parent may have pregnancy-related medical leave where they need to receive prenatal or postnatal care. That would qualify under the medical leave bucket. After that is complete, that parent may transition into bonding leave which is family leave afterwards. And that would be a total of up to 20 weeks.
Hey, there's another question. Are family members, even those who are under 18 or work part-time, covered by paid leave?
Are family members, even those under 18 or people who work part-time, covered by paid leave? Yes. There's no specific exclusion for any type of employee under the program. The only real exclusions under the program are for self-employed individuals and independent contractors. To caution folks, that definition for independent contractors is the same definition that DLI uses, and it does need to be a legitimate 1099 independent contractor. But for family members, even those under 18 or folks that work part-time or folks that work seasonally in most cases, interns, J1 visas, H2A visas, all of those folks would be covered under the paid leave program.
Okay, next question. Do we report wages when they are or when
Say that again, Kurt.
do we report wages when they are earned or when they are paid?
Great. Yeah, so every quarter, now that the wage detail collection has begun, every quarter employers across the state need to submit a wage detail report. For the majority of employers that are covered by the unemployment insurance system, that isn't a change in process. So when you complete your regular unemployment insurance filing, that information shared directly with the paid leave division to meet your wage reporting requirement. For employers that don't, you'll need to set up that paid leave only account to report wages on a quarterly basis as well. Now, when you're reporting wages, we use the same definition of wages as the unemployment insurance division, which is that it's for wages that are paid within the quarter. So even if you've earned wages in a previous quarter, if it's paid during that first week of October, it would appear in that quarter's filing.
I'll pose a question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Jump in.
For a self-employed, say a self-employed farmer, what benefits might they take from this program and how can they use those benefits?
Awesome question. Yeah, so as we mentioned, the only exclusions to the program are independent contractors and self-employed individuals. But if you're a self-employed individual, you are able to opt into coverage closer to implementation. The reason you may choose to do so is that this is not this is very similar to a short-term disability program. If you have a qualifying event, you'd be eligible for the same benefits that an employee would be, although the job protection provisions wouldn't apply. But you would be eligible for up to 12 weeks of benefit payments for family leave, 12 weeks of payments for medical leave, or up to 20 weeks of combined leave.
With it being a farm setting and, the animals still need to be fed even if they're out and, they're not necessarily getting a paycheck every week. They're getting paid based on when the animals go to market. Is there anything that is relevant to that scenario?
Yeah, that's so like we said, the wages that are reported are based off of when the wages are paid, or in that case, when the wages are when you actually, well, actually, how does this work? So for self-employed individuals, it's based off of your net earnings from self-employment, and it's over an annual number. This does get a little bit more complex, so sorry for this, or sorry for like the kind of disjointedness of the question, the answer. Okay, so for a self-employed individual, your financial eligibility for the program is based off of your net earnings from self-employment, and that's the annual amount that you report on your S corp or your tax filings to the IRS. That number is divided by 4 to create a quarterly amount. We do that on the back end. That then is used to determine your average weekly wage and the amount that you would be receiving during the course of a qualified absence. So instead of having a quarterly report for a self-employed individual, it would be an annual sharing of the net earnings from self-employment in order to determine financial eligibility in your benefit amount. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. And then, for like a farmer, the animals still need to be fed, the crops still need to be taken care of. Could they use some of that money to pay someone to do the tasks that they are unable to do, say if they were injured or sick?
Yeah, absolutely you could. So yeah, it is income replacement, and it would be paid on a weekly basis. Additionally, something to know is that if you're a employer in the state with fewer than 30 employees where the average employee makes less than 150% of the statewide average, which is about 105K. If you fall into that criteria, we also have a grant program that we're going to be going live with in January of 2026 that offers up to $3,000 for supporting that employer during the course of an absence. And that could be for things like either hiring temporary workers or increasing the wages of folks in order to cover for somebody while they are recovering from the qualifying event.
We have another question. Can someone get paid Minnesota paid leave and short-term disability if they have something that qualifies for both and they have a short-term disability plan?
Okay, can someone get paid for both paid leave and short-term disability if they have something that qualifies for both and they have a short-term disability plan? Okay, yeah. Yes, you could, but with some caveats. So under the statute, we're what's called the first payer in this relationship, which means that the paid leave benefit won't be offset based off of the fact that you have a short-term disability plan. However, under the statute, an individual is limited to what their average wage would have been if they would have been working. So the short-term disability provider will offset their benefit to the person's average wage. So you can have both, but it's a great time to take a look at your short-term disability coverage because it could work in a couple of ways where you could adjust to make sure that it is an in-excess plan. So they're only covering the difference between what the state plan offers and what full wage replacement looks like. Or as Corinne mentioned about the equivalent plans, we're issuing guidance on this over the next year. But an employer does have the ability to offer these benefits themselves rather than going through the state plan. And in some cases, a short-term disability plan can be enhanced to the level that it would meet the requirements for a private plan exemption as well.
Small employers dealing with finding the help they need during an employee absence, knowing the coverage help has to be temporary.
Okay. Yeah. So if we're well aware that these moments are not just important for the person that's experiencing the qualifying event, they're also important for their employer. So we did mention the small employer grants program that's going to be going live in January in order to provide some funding to be able to identify temporary workers or to increase the wages of workers in order to cover for an individual while someone is out on a qualified leave. Additionally, one of the benefits of the way that we're approaching our implementation is that we are part of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and we're actively looking for ways to support employers during these events. And we'd actually really welcome feedback on ways to best support you during these types of events as well.
Is there a way that Deed could partner with local temp agencies to help identify potential temporary employees?
I think it's a great idea. We'll definitely take it down and investigate. Currently, we don't have it. We don't have that as part of our statute, but we'd be more than happy to look at what is possible here.
All right. Do we have any further discussion on paid leave?
There is one more question. For the small business assistance funding, does 30 employees refer to FTEs or does it also include part-time people? And what about independent contractors?
Okay. So I'm going to take the second part of that first. Independent contractors do not count towards your employee count. However, part-time employees would. The way that employee count is explained in the statute is that it's a calculation done once a year in October, and it's based off of the previous 4 quarters wage detail report submitted by that employer. If in any one of those quarters that employer has more than 30 employees appearing on that on a single return, they don't qualify as a small employer under the program. But if they do have under 30 employees in each quarter, then that would be the employee count.
Another question, how is the employer notified when someone?
Okay. So how is an employer notified when someone applies for leave? So we're currently implementing, we're developing the application, the employee and the employer experience today. So there's still plenty of time to help us understand the best way to engage employers. In fact, this is a topic within our rulemaking as well, where we try to outline what an employer's role looks like in the process of an application for leave. So our process is still under development, but one of the advantages that we've got, I previously, from before taking this position, I was the deputy director of the program, the paid leave program in Massachusetts. And so I can walk through a bit of what that process looks like and how we involve employers. And I would say that it's forming a kind of prior for the way that we're thinking about the engagement for employers here in Minnesota as well. But we do want to get feedback from employers to make sure that the experience that we're designing really is for Minnesota employers. So the way that this works in Massachusetts is that first, an employee needs to tell their employer that they're going to be going out on leave. It's required by both statutes. And so the first question in the application for the paid leave program is, have you notified your employer? If you say no, then we tell you, please go notify your employer. But if you say yes, then we send an email to both you and your employer saying that an application for benefits has begun. We do that because we want to make the experience as transparent as possible and give you as much forewarning that an application is started so that you can prepare on your side as best as possible. After that, the applicant completes all the information that you would expect to see in an application for benefits, including the days that they're going to be off, why they need the leave, if they're receiving any other leaves or benefits during the course of an absence, and any certification documentation. So like Corinne mentioned, every one of these leaves has their own certification requirements where a healthcare professional or a designated professional needs to sign off that this is a required leave. After they submit all of that, they hit submit, and then we would generate a request for information to the employer, where we share information that was provided in the application directly with the employer. And we ask, is this what you're seeing as well? Do you have the same information on your side as we do? And assuming everything goes well, you have the ability to tell us if something doesn't feel right or if something doesn't sound right. But if everything goes well, then that comes into the department as part of the adjudicatory flow. During the adjudication, we look at information provided by the employee, the employer, the healthcare provider, and our own administrative data to make an adjudicatory decision. And once that decision is made, we again notify both the employee and the employer of that decision. Additionally, we ended up building a dashboard view so that an employer was able to see the number of employees that have applied, what they've applied for, where they are in the process, if they've been approved, for what dates or what schedule, as well as how much they're getting paid and when, to be able to support benefits coordination on your side. That's what the process looked like in Massachusetts. We're looking to build a process here in Minnesota that really meets the needs of employers here as well.
Okay, this is an important one. Are there any safeguards to keep employees from abusing the program?
Yes. We do hear this a lot, and we share a commitment to program integrity. The purpose of the program is to support people during those big moments, and it is a limited pool of money. So we want to make sure that those dollars are best directed to folks that really need them. We have a number of controls in place, or we will have a number of controls in place during the application process. I can't talk about all of them publicly because sometimes the best controls are the ones that you don't know about. However, probably the most visible one that I want to highlight is that employer response. We really want to engage employers throughout the application process and have an open line of communication, because you know your employers better than you do. You have a more direct connection with them. And we want to make sure that if there is something that we should be looking at, you have the ability to tell us. There's going to be other controls there that are within the program that we might not go into as much detail with, but that's one that's probably the most visible.
Great. If my employees are taking advantage of the program, will my premiums increase as a result? Will utilization equal higher premiums?
Okay. Yeah. So I think this is really connected to the experience in unemployment insurance, which is called an experience rating. So if you have employees, if you use the unemployment system at a higher rate than other employers, then your rate goes up for unemployment insurance. That does not exist for the paid leave program. It's a consistent rate across the entire state, and it is not experience rated. So regardless of utilization, the rate will be equal regardless for all employers.
I think we can take that last question in the Q&A, and then we'll move on to our final topic of the day, if that's all right.
Oh, absolutely.
You can read it.
The last question is, how extensive does the medical verification from an employee need to be?
Great question. And it's also a topic of rulemaking, as well as something that we are actively designing today. With that said, the standard within the statute is extremely similar to what you would see under FMLA. So it is a certification from a medical provider or designated professional working in their area of specialization that attests to the fact that this person needs to be out, and includes information that shows that the employee is unable to perform their job as a result of their qualifying condition. I think with that, we want to thank you guys for the opportunity to present with you all today. We're so grateful for the chance to talk with employers across the state. And I think through the roadshow over the summer, we've learned a lot about turkeys in Minnesota. And we're so excited to make the connection here and hope that this is the start of the conversation and not the end.
Thank you, Greg and Corinne, for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to share that information with our growers. I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Shauna Voss to close out the webinar with a disease update.
Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, figured this out. I always struggle with Zoom. You guys know that. Okay, I'll try to keep this succinct with my updates here today. Thanks everybody for inviting me back again. I appreciate that. I'm mostly going to talk today about our high path that's going on, and it's continuing to be an ongoing event here in Minnesota. And unfortunately, we've got an increase in cases in the last couple weeks. The box over on the left-hand side of the screen there is all of our presumptive or confirmed cases that we've had since the fall outbreak started. So it started back in the middle of November with our backyard World Organization for Animal Health non-poultry case in Martin County. And then we've had now 5 commercial cases, 3 of which are confirmed, 2 of which are pending confirmation at NBSL. And then yesterday we did a report a presumptive positive in Houston County in a backyard flock. The numbers over there on the left are still our confirmed cases. And so that number will change as soon as we get those NBSL confirmation back. And that is total cases from our start of our outbreak, which is now going on a full 3 years. We are not alone in this. So you guys are probably seeing lots of reports around. This is the national situation across the country for poultry only. I'm not going to cover dairy cattle today, but you can see all through that our Mississippi Flyway, all the way from Minnesota down to Louisiana, we're seeing cases recently. And so this kind of reminds me a little bit of how 2022 started, with everybody seeming to be impacted and getting reports from wild bird mortality events as well. Unfortunately, we're not quite done with this yet, and hopefully this wraps up soon and we get a little bit of a break, but stay diligent with the cases. Wanted to just give a real quick update on the different types of genotypes, and NVSL has been much more transparent about the genotypes that they're seeing. And so in 2024, they started to actually report those onto our NVSL reports that we're getting. So we've been able to kind of keep track of the different genotypes that we're seeing in the state and even across the country. And so just looking at our cases this spring and summer, the majority of our cases in poultry were that cattle B313 strain. And so that's the strain that is currently circulating in dairy cattle almost exclusively until it spills over into poultry. And so all of our commercial cases, except for one, which was the Dodge County case, was the B313. The Dodge County case was a C21. That's a wild bird strain and spillover, and I did include some of our backyard flocks from the spring as well. Clay County was a B36, and our Stevens County, which if you remember, that was our case that had a goat that was infected on the same premises, and that was a B36 as well. This fall, the cases that are the genotypes that we're primarily seeing for what's been reported so far, that is a little delayed in getting that information back. But our Martin County cases were an A3, which is kind of one of those original strains that came over in 2022, or some of those early varieties. And then with our Meeker County commercial cases, they were identified as a D13, which is a new genotype that hadn't been reported before, but it is very closely related to the D11 and D12 that was originally seen over on the West Coast, and is causing problems in a lot of different poultry, and is even causing the human cases that have been reported. And so that's one to watch pretty carefully to see what happens next with that one. Our Meeker County cases, they are either, there was a potential for lateral transmission with the cases that they could see with the genetic typing that they did. There's also a potential for common source. And as you may be aware, these cases were all very, very closely related in proximity to one another. And so that's just some of that additional information that genotyping helps us to better understand how that virus is being transmitted. Some other just newsworthy headlines that you guys are probably all seeing. These were just some headlines that I pulled off of the web this morning, because there's been a fair bit of news that has come across in just the last 24 hours. And some of the ones that I wanted to report is there has been a case of H5N1 in a person in Louisiana. that had contact with infected backyard birds, and Louisiana just reported a case in a backyard flock within the last few days. But this is the first case in the U.S. that's not been associated with a commercial flock. The patient was 65 years old and did have some underlying health conditions. And so the risk to the public is still low, but I think it's just important to remember that those who are working with birds and livestock should continue to take necessary precautions to protect themselves, especially when working with sick animals. And I do believe that that genotype with that individual has been typed out to a D11. And then yesterday, the governor of California declared a state of emergency, mostly due to all of their cattle cases that they're seeing. They have some, I don't know, 650 or more cases in dairy cattle. And what that state of emergency does is just to help streamline their approach and provide some flexibility around some staffing and contracting work that they need to do. So that's kind of that made some headlines today. And I threw the cat news article in there because we're continuing to see cases of this H5N1 in cats. They obviously are very susceptible. So again, that's just another thing to kind of keep tabs on as we move forward with this outbreak. And then I just wanted to mention the USDA order and the National Milk Strategy, milk testing strategy that's come about. This is not my area of expertise, but I know we've received a lot of questions on what that's going to look like in Minnesota. And so I did reach out to Dr. Nicole Neeser, who's a veterinarian with the Minnesota Department of Ag, and she's the director of their meat and dairy inspection program. And so we're relying pretty heavily on them to help with this surveillance strategy. And so, I will certainly take any questions and answer them as best as I can. But ultimately, this is kind of still a little bit of a work in progress. But this national milk testing strategy does involve 5 stages that you can see here on the screen. And it's supposed to start with silo testing and then progress down through the different stages to actually demonstrate freedom of the disease in the U.S. However, I think it's important to note that these stages are not necessarily going to be progressive. And so, while some states might start with silo testing, that silo testing may continue throughout the different stages. Some states might choose to start and go directly to the bulk milk testing. And so it kind of depends on a lot of different factors, how many infected farms are identified, and resources. But it is important to note that the stage 5 cannot be achieved until all states are negative for the virus. So USDA is working with individual states to develop something that works for each individual state. Certainly the size and the scale of the dairy industry and the infrastructure varies state by state, and that can impact how and who might collect these samples. The first round of testing is reportedly California, Colorado, Michigan, Mississippi, Oregon, and Pennsylvania, although I did see reports just shortly before that they're expanding it to a second round already. Timing in Minnesota can probably be expected in the next couple months. We're working to prepare some supplies and logistics and figure out our testing strategy here locally. And I already mentioned that MDA, because they oversee and regulate milk in Minnesota, they will be taking the lead on this testing strategy. But obviously they need to partner with the Board of Animal Health, especially if there's any non-negatives that are detected through that testing process. And at this time, we do plan to use the Minnesota Veterinary Diagnostic Lab to do all of that testing samples for us. We've got a couple different options to consider when we look at how we're going to implement the testing strategies. We could certainly just go to each individual farm. That obviously allows some easy traceability and it ensures that we're only collecting samples from Minnesota farms. But obviously that could be pretty labor intensive. We could look at taking samples from tankers, which might represent just one farm or it could represent multiple farms. If it's one farm, again, it's easily traceable. Multiple farms makes that more difficult. And it's just important to remember that the plants that receive takers from all over, that milk is commingling at the transfer stations or the plant. So that adds a little bit of a challenge. And then silo sampling, represents many farms. And so it's fewer samples that need to be taken, but traceability gets to be more difficult, especially if they are receiving samples from other states. And so, the goal with designing a monitoring program is certainly to aim that we are sampling as many farms as possible with each sampling effort, so that we're efficient with that sampling. And the statistical analysis that MDA has done shows that we have to collect around 1,400 farms to be confident that we do not have the disease at any point in time. And at this point in time, MDA has about 1,600 farms or more with permits. And so, as you can see, that number is pretty high to make sure that we're sampling from each farm each month. And again, I mentioned that they are hoping to start this in February. This is a pretty big undertaking by any stretch of the imagination. And so what they want to do, and by they, I mean MDA, is to use any existing infrastructure just to maximize the efficiency of getting those samples collected. And so we want to ensure that the samples are of good quality, that they're appropriately identified so that we can do the tracebacks and then run in a timely manner. And so some of the ideas that are being proposed is to have the bulk haulers, which are already collecting samples and are used to kind of handling that milk, collect an additional sample once a week and send it to the lab. And then the lab makes decisions about which portion of those samples will get run. Another option is to work with the individual industry labs, which is a smaller number, to collect a subsample from those existing samples that are already being processed through. And then a third option that was proposed was to have either board or MDA staff manually collect those samples. And obviously that's pretty labor intensive, and we may not have the personnel to be able to do that. Whichever sampling strategy is decided upon, they're taking into consider biosecurity, training, outreach, available staff, all of those things to make sure that we're not part of the problem in spreading disease around. And we also need to make sure that if needed, if our response becomes pretty overwhelmed, that we've got the opportunity to kind of scale back and reassess the situation. So that is what I had on the testing strategy for milk that's coming our way. I think stay tuned as more information becomes available. But I just want to end today by providing a little note about the testing schedule with the Christmas and New Year's holiday coming up here. So our labs, as you know, we've got the MPTL and the VDL. The schedules are up here. The MPTL is and will be closed on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. The Thursday is also a university holiday, but they will be open with a kind of a skeleton crew to be able to conduct avian influenza testing. And then Friday, they're back to their normal hours. And on New Year's Day, although the lab is closed, they will be available for sick bird emergency testing if needed. So then that goes back to the VDL for coverage on the days that the MPTL is closed. So they'll be available for sick bird testing Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then New Year's Day as well. Just make sure if anybody needs testing on those days when the lab is closed to coordinate it through the Board of Animal Health. So give me a call, send me a text, make arrangements that way, and we'll make sure that we get those samples covered. And that is what I've got.
All right, thank you, Shauna. Do we have any questions for Dr. Voss? Doesn't look like it. And we are right at 1 o'clock. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Shauna, for presenting. And we will see you again in January. Once again, this recording will be posted to the website for anyone to watch who is a member of Minnesota Turkey Growers. Thank you and Merry Christmas.